Our next panel is designed to really focus on that spectrum of use. And to moderate it, we have Carlo Ubienco from the New York City Economic Development Corporation, who has been working very hard over the last 8 years to put us where we are today. So Carlo?
Thank you, Nancy. Great to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate today's panel. And it's so nice to see all of our panelists, a lot of which are sort of friendly, familiar faces, and one new face. Thank you again for offering up your time today. The topic of today's panel, this panel, is to focus around frontier technologies, or what the symposium is entitling frontier technologies. And I believe that there are a variety of different subverticals within what is classified as a frontier technology, stemming from, we have representation on the panel here today from the therapeutics industries, and specifically a subset that's very important to the therapies, which is drug delivery. We have representation from the tools market, including biological and hardware tools, as well as the diagnostic lab market, which is now in the times of this pandemic, unfortunately, is more relevant than ever. And in addition, a field that the symposium and the group behind the symposium has always been a staunch proponent of is the realm of synthetic biology, which also weaves its way into some of the other verticals that we're going to be discussing today. So the way I'd like to structure today's panel, we've got an hour with all of you, and we've got quite a large panel today. I was thinking that we have an opportunity for all of you to introduce yourselves, and we'll go in a particular order. I think that's shared beforehand. Then dive into some specific questions according to your verticals, just to give the audience here, a lot of which is coming from a variety of different backgrounds, not science, a little exposure and introduction, if you will, of what your industry does and how relevant it is to a successful and healthy life sciences cluster or ecosystem. And then segue into the latter half of the conversation, the second half of a group discussion around a couple of key questions that we think that are important for this particular audience to hear your thoughts on. And so with that, maybe we can just go very briefly through introductions about yourself, your company, your role within your company, a little bit about your background, as well as a key question, which is why did you and/or your company take root in New York City? So what's sort of the impetus for your company being in New York City, which is obviously very relevant to the mission of NYC Builds Bio. So with that, Anthony, would you like to kick us off with introductions?
Thanks. It helps when I'm off mute. So thanks, Carlo. And thanks, Nancy, for the time. So yeah, I'm Anthony Johnson, the CEO and co-founder of Codicos Therapeutics. We are a non-viral oncology gene therapy company working on a very exciting new technology and new area of biology. We set up shop in New York City literally this year, actually. So we've been looking around for a place to kind of start the business. We licensed the technology from Emory University, and at the root of what we do is we have a technology called zip code technology that allows us to specifically hit cancer cells. And so that's, we're using it as a therapeutic, but it has implications and indications for diagnostics, being able to catch these zip codes in circulation, and then also things like in vivo imaging. And so we're located in Biolabs, located down on 180 Varick Street. And I think, is that good for a start? A little bit about my background. So my background I used to run a company called Empire Genomics, which was an oncology molecular diagnostics company in Buffalo, and then came back to New York City in the beginning of 2019.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. Chirag, I believe you're going to be speaking on behalf of the Pandemic Response Lab NYC today. So thank you for joining us on last minute notice.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here. So I'm currently with Pandemic Response Lab NYC, which is a built-for-purpose molecular diagnostics lab focused on if you had to guess, coronavirus diagnostics, specifically high throughput. We licensed technology from NYU in about the middle of July and transitioned that into a fully fledged 30,000 square foot molecular diagnostics lab in the Alexandria Center in the West Tower. My current role there is serving as medical director, and my background is I trained as a anatomic, clinical, and molecular pathologist at Stony Brook, and then for the fellowship at Columbia Medical Center. The reason our company took root in New York City, specifically at the Alexandria Center, is our kind of anchor customer is the health and hospital system for the city of New York. So our role for the health and hospital system is to serve as an overflow testing or kind of backup testing lab specifically dedicated to their coronavirus needs for the immediate future.
Great. Thank you so much, Chirag. Moving on, Laura Katz is joining us from Helena. Hi, Laura.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Laura. I'm the founder and CEO of Helena. Helena is a new consumer biology company. We started working here in biolabs at NYU Langone in January. So we're very, very brand new to the New York biotech space. Our goal is to create biosynthetic human milk ingredients to produce a healthier and more sustainable infant formula alternative for infants and parents globally. We're doing that by basically harnessing fermentation and engineering yeast to train them how to produce human milk ingredients that look and feel and function just like that of what we would find in breast milk. So our goal is better health outcomes for babies who consume our product and a more equitable space for parents. I'm also an adjunct professor at NYU. I teach food science there, food science and tech, and I have been for a few years. And my background is in food science. So I don't personally come from the molecular biology world, although my whole team is doing that here at Biolabs. Why we chose NYC and why we love being here in New York is because ultimately the food industry where I come from is a consumer space. And I really think that the best brands are built in New York City, and we're ultimately going to be a consumer biology brand. So I want to be in a place where we can merge biotech in this thing that's traditionally been more pharma oriented and bring that into the consumer world. And I think New York City is just the perfect setting to do that and to start to introduce these kinds of things to people who are used to less biotech oriented brands. So that's why we chose New York.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. And we're going to revisit that narrative of consumer biotech and how that has a role in New York City, relevant to certainly New York City's marketing powerhouse. Will, thank you for joining us from Opentrons.
Hey, yes, Will Kanine. I'm co-founder of Opentrons. We make robots that biologists use. So we're the one company, I think, on here that doesn't actually make biology, but we're still in the life sciences space. If any of you all in the audience have spent a lot of time in the lab, you'll know that most of what you're doing is moving tiny amounts of liquid around from vial to vial by hand. And 9 out of 10 labs do that manually, and 1 out of 10 has a robot. And those typically are the wealthiest, Western labs, things like that. Opentrons makes a robot that's 10 times cheaper than any other lab robot out there, democratizing lab automation. So we're now in over 2,000 labs, which includes, the best research institutions, the biggest pharmaceutical companies, as well as like community colleges, high schools, and various places all over the world and on every continent. And we got started in Brooklyn because, honestly, we are really of the Brooklyn kind of tech ecosystem. I started on my technology career. I worked on political campaigns for Democrats for a long time and progressives, and then moved to New York for Occupy Wall Street. and then went to ITP at NYU, which is where I started getting my hands on 3D printers, and was also spending a lot of my time in Brooklyn in GenSpace, which is the biohacker space in Brooklyn. And I was learning how to pipette, and I'm like, why the heck can't I download this experiment and hit run like I can on my 3D printer? Like, why doesn't that exist? And, you know, I met my co-founder, who's been in New Jersey in high throughput automation for the last 20 years and was building the affordable robot that I was dreaming about. And at this point, you know, we started as a Kickstarter project out of a biohacker space in downtown Brooklyn. And we're now more than 200 people in Dumbo and Shenzhen, China. And, you know, this summer, the Pandemic Response Lab that Chirag is medical director of is an offshoot of Opentrons, because this year has really shown that the world needs affordable lab automation in a serious way. And you know, Carlo from the EDC, I'll just toot your horn a little bit, because you've been really heading up the city's approach at how do we get more diagnostics happening in New York City. And we had that conversation. Can Opentrons help with that in, you know, early in the summer, which is what led to us licensing this technology from NYU and spinning out this amazing high throughput diagnostics lab that Chirag now runs. So, you know, Opentrons is very much of the New York ecosystem. Without it, we would never exist. And I'm happy to be here speaking. I think this is my second time on this panel. So thanks a lot, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Will. And thank you for the kind shout out. I'm one of many voices in the city side working on things. So there's
For sure.
definitely not just me, but thank you nonetheless. And not last but not least, and certainly, you know, we're thrilled to have you on, Prem, because I know how busy you are these days in particular, but it was so great to see you on the panel. Thank you for joining us. And actually, I think looking at the four other panelists, I think you're the only one who doesn't have some type of a tie-in necessarily to NYU. I'm just noticing that pattern right now. Anthony, you're in an NYU incubator. Will, you are from ITP. You're an NYU graduate. Laura, you're a professor, and Chirag, you're a spin out. So Prem, thank you for representing the rest of this very large city, and also a very important part of the New York City life sciences ecosystem in Brooklyn. So please introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that warm intro. I'm Prem Surratt. I'm one of the co-founders and current CEO of Miramis. So we actually have our roots from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And after they boot us out of the campus, said you've overstayed your welcome, we obviously had to make a decision, and this was back in 2016 of, you know, do we stay in Long Island or do we come to the city? And obviously having my sort of roots and everything in the city, I chose that, and I chose the SUNY Downstate Incubator, given the amount of space that we need. And at that time, there were no other incubators. There was no biolabs, there was no J labs, there was no, you know, things of that nature. So we kind of had no option, but we planted ourselves in downstate in Brooklyn. We, you know, we were in the RNAi space and also in genetic engineering. We're partnered with Charles River Labs. We do all of the genetic engineering for North America, Charles Rivers. So what we've been able to do in our expertise is really taking these complex biological processes and building out pipelines to make them more efficient, cost effective, and, you know, really scalable for commercial applications. That's where our expertise lies. And more recently, you know, we now are actually at a pivot point where we've been contracted now for research development of therapeutics, RNAi therapeutics for with Biogen. So that's a nice pivoting role of us to really get in that space. And even more recently, we just spun out our Miramis clinical labs in response to the COVID pandemic. So, you know, we were kind of at the forefront of this, working with SUNY Downstate Medical Center. But what occurred to me very early on was the need for routine testing, routine viral testing, and it had to be affordable. So we, you know, started developing this back in March, April, And now we have an offering of what we call this saliva pool testing, where we can test up to 24 individuals in a pool, thereby scaling our capacity, reducing our reagent use by, we probably use about 1/20th of any other lab. We have a 2,000 square foot footprint, but we are going to be able in the next 2 weeks to be processing more than 30,000 samples a day, given our level of pooling and what we do. We have more than 4 dozen schools on our roster. We have nursing homes. I think any type of business you can imagine, from movie studios to, the full, like US Olympic teams, NBA, we're partnered with a lot of different institutions to really help them get back up and running. And at this current moment in time, it's not even just schools, independent schools, it's school districts now. Entire school districts of Boston, of Connecticut have reached out to us to implement their getting, school back up and running program. So we have about 50,000 individuals currently on our waiting list that we're scaling and going to be implementing testing for them, rolling out in November on a soft ramp up. But we're capable of doing that now with our current pipeline. So it's been a wonderful, dramatic response. Space is clearly of an issue because while we have lab space, my people have no place to sit, in that small footprint, but we're proud of what we've been able to accomplish in the really short time period.
Oh, that's remarkable. And I imagine that we can do a whole panel just on what you've been accomplishing in the last couple of months. So thank you for all that you're doing, Prem, and also you too, Chirag, and Will, on the COVID-19 response across the city and in other jurisdictions. It's tremendous and really gives us pause to take a step back from all of this, of what we're doing, and really appreciate how our industry can make an impact. So I'd like to segue into more of a rapid fire round that will provide the audience with a bit of an amuse-bouche, if you will, of your industries, and then go into the group discussion. So with that, Anthony, maybe you could introduce for the audience a little bit about the drug delivery industry. What's that particular problem set that you and other companies like yourselves are really solving, and how big is that problem? And then also, how do you collaborate with obviously others in that drug development pipeline?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it's quite poignant, kind of touching on obviously some of the things you're talking about with COVID and things on those lines. So particularly in the area of oncology, I mean, a big issue is we have many drugs that are lethal out there, right? So chemotherapeutics do a great job of killing cells. The problem is they are non-specific, so they kill a lot of cells in the body. And so what the issue is, particularly in the area of oncology and other areas, is that you want to be able to hit the cells that are diseased, eradicate those, and then leave obviously healthy cells untouched. And so for our technology, the zip code technology, the beauty of it is that because it's a DNA-based system that we're using for delivery, we're able to, in essence, ligate a lot of different compounds. So you can think of things like RNAi, you can think of chemotherapeutics, you can think of antibodies that are honestly, we know that the safety treatment protocols of these various molecules, we know their toxicity, and if we can just actually have them hit specific cells, that's the holy grail, as it were. And so that's what we're doing, and that's one of the major issues. I mean, obviously CRISPR and Jennifer Doudna won the Nobel Prize this year, right? And we know the potential of genetic editing and gene editing in the CRISPR platform, but again, off-target effects are one of the major issues, right? So if we can be very specific in terms of only hitting cells that, for instance, have a p53 mutation, it changes the entire game in terms of disease profiles and ability to manage, for instance, cancer as a chronic disease, as opposed to, right, some of these acute ones that are out there. So that's where I think it's from a standpoint of like market size and everything else, if we can figure out the ability to hit these discrete cell types, right, and then either edit the genes that are incorrect, kill those cells, or transform those cells, then in terms of how we manage disease will be dramatically changed.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
And having worked on a drug delivery project myself in my days as a scientist, it's a very important class of work to get these drugs to be efficacious. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. Prem and Will, Maybe you could introduce the tools and services market when it comes to R&D, and both on the biological as well as the hardware side. How big is the industry that enables R&D?
Sure, I'll go first. Working with Charles River, and basically, one of every 2 research models is delivered by Charles River Laboratories. And so that gives us a tremendous insight into the, broad span of clients that we have, from large pharma to mid-cap biotech to all the way to academic research labs. It gives us, for the last, 8 years, we've been partnered with them. Again, the insight of what everybody needs in a preclinical space to reach that clinical pipeline, at the end of the day, right? The IND, and what does that data need to look like? And so that insight has given us tremendous value add to every other project that we do for anyone, but also our own. And this is why you can see we've been sort of in this pivotal stage now where, hey, your tools have been working really good for research. What about therapeutics? We're finally nailed down the delivery side, after 20 some years. Can we now turn this into a therapeutic? And I think this is the timing. This is the absolute right time for us to do that. And I'll let you carry on, Will.
Sure. Yeah. So we have started at the, sort of biohacker level in garages, and then we sold to like the Stanford and the MIT people who are hackers at academic institutions. And we're, sort of slowly working our way up as really a hacker platform that hasn't, that's not really a tool class that exists in life science. In digital tech, it's a, known and long-standing thing, open source technology that technical individuals pile on to develop more on, and then it grows from there. And being an open source hacker platform hasn't really existed in life sciences before. And we got a lot of like, you're not building a business, are you? Like that's a toy, right? At the beginning, which is if you've read, any of the classics about like the innovator's dilemma or anything on disruption, that's what you want the incumbents to be saying when you're building your first product. But then, as every year you make it better and better and better, you start being appropriate for more and more types of users. So instead of just the hackers, at the start of last year, we introduced our visual protocol designer. So you can go online and point and click around and create a protocol. And by the way, you can email that protocol to anybody else in the world so they can just download and reproduce exactly what you're doing. And so every year, and then this year we introduced the on-deck thermocycler, so that instead of having to take your samples off the robot and put them onto a thermocycler, you can leave them on for NGS library preps and other compound protocols like that. And so we stay at the low price point, which means that academic labs, small labs, community colleges, et cetera, want to work with us and have always been our customer. But now we're, selling 100 labs, 100 robots to other biotech tool companies because they're like, oh, we have a sequencer and we want your robot at the front of all of our sequencers because it's affordable. I think basically the value of life science products is so huge and transformative, and the tools that we have to build them are not in the 21st century in a lot of ways. And I think that there's just a huge amount of potential to apply best practices of digital technology, consumer technology in the life sciences space, and that's where Opentrons is really focused.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Will. That's a pretty compelling vision for a number of reasons, but one might think that, a lot of us have scientific backgrounds as panelists, and I wonder if the vision there for technologies and platforms like yourselves are to get to a point where the one-on-one, the sort of the rudimentary skills that one learns when they enter into a lab for the first time is not a basic pipetting skill, but actually programming an automation robot or picking up CRISPR kits and being able to apply them with great ease. So that's fantastic.
I have to
Prem?
say, I really, applaud you, Will, and the attitude, the direction that you went from being open source and all that. I think the pandemic for me has been an eye-opening experience where, we were open source. We are open source. Our entire protocol, everything that we do has been absolutely transparent. It's posted online. We're working with Yale, their open source protocol, the sharing of this. But we are at a price point where nobody wants to set up to do what we do, without our expertise, because it's just too low, like our price point for testing, right? We're at a point where, and so this spirit, I think, is contrary to the normal scientific, academic, we got to protect everything by IP. We've got to, and it's, in this moment of crises, and I have my VCs, hey, did you protect? No, I'm not protecting this. I don't have time for this. I want to build a pipeline where everybody can get tested. That is the goal. That is the mission. We are out to do this. And without protection of, the pipeline, all of that, it is still like we are, so high in demand that there's no way I can test everybody in America. I've told them, I said, we have to share. We have to share, get everyone to reach our price point. And this is the only way this country will get back on track. And I think that this attitude of opening up our books and just being completely collaborative, has really helped, me reach a whole level. And it's definitely contrary to the scientific world, So I'm
the current industry is very right. They're not going to be able to compete with companies that care about a low price point and open source, because their whole strategy is we're going to lock it down and charge as much as we possibly can.
And then they can't move fast enough. That's the problem.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic, I'm going to change the order a little bit here. Laura, I'm going to have you anchor us here, but Chirag, I'm going to insert you into the conversation because it seems like we're sort of segueing naturally into the discussion of diagnostic laboratories. Do you have any thoughts to share on the business model and the manner of conducting business with respect to COVID diagnostic testing?
Sure, yeah, I think just piggybacking off of Prem and Will, they're absolutely right in that kind of the traditional way that diagnostic labs have been built, at least reference diagnostic labs, is a send-out model where hospitals and health systems send to these large kind of centrally located or not necessarily centrally located labs that then take 3, 5, 7, 9 days or longer to perform esoteric tests or generally tests that many hospitals and health systems don't necessarily perform on a daily basis. This entire model was kind of upended by coronavirus, in which case the community essentially required that testing be broadly available to anyone who needed it, and not just broadly available, but with test results returned within a reasonable time frame. And for our lab, the Pandemic Response Lab, kind of one of the core deliverables that we strive to achieve is a turnaround time of less than 24 hours. So we get a sample and then we return the result within 24 hours, where the data that we provide back is actionable to ordering physicians, it's actionable to patients, it's actionable to public health officials who can then do contact tracing to prevent further spread of the virus itself. So I think kind of over the past couple of months, a lot of what I would call traditional diagnostic labs, their business model, I think, is now changing. And what I'm hoping for is kind of this more broad sense, open source, locally located laboratories, which perform testing and deliver back results within a reasonable time frame, or within a time frame where the results are actionable and meaningful.
That's great. Good insight. And I'm sure we could definitely have a whole panel discussion on that by itself. So Nancy, maybe if there's time for a fourth day, let us know. Segue into a really big and exciting, and this is mentioned earlier by one of the panelists about the recent Nobel announcement of Doudna and her collaborators being awarded for CRISPR. Laura, can you speak to us about how biotech solutions really come to address consumer problems, and speak to that notion, that very important notion to synthetic biology impacting the world?
Definitely. I think, I think about this through the lens of food because that's how I perceive the world. That's my background. And I think that just from a sustainability perspective, being able to biomanufacture ingredients that we previously relied on from animal agriculture or from other agricultural outputs that weigh really heavily on the environment, being able to start to shift that is going to have a significant impact on our environmental sustainability, or hopefully build a supply chain and a food system or a consumer system at large that can improve the way that we treat the environment. I think, at C16, of course, they're in the same space as us. They're looking at this through the same lens as well. I think for us, and what I've seen as kind of like a stopgap in being able to translate biotech and what we do here in the lab and what a lot of people are working on in their labs is how do we actually commercialize that and how do we bring that to consumers at a cost that makes sense, with a supply chain that makes sense, and just in an equitable way. And that's something that I think is going to continue to be a challenge and a struggle for people who do work in consumer biology and want to be able to bring these types of solutions to consumers. Impossible Foods is our best example because they've been able to do it. And they have their soy-like hemoglobin that they manufacture using yeast, similar type of system to what we're doing, but those manufacturers are few and far between. And when we think about scaling this technology up, it takes a lot of skill and it takes a lot of bandwidth from a capital perspective to be able to play enough around with your fermentation and really see that at scale to get it to a cost that makes sense for consumers. And so when we think about the landscape, I think that that's going to be and continues to be a big challenge for companies like us. We know that it is a big challenge for the cell-based meat companies, although they face a whole other set of regulatory concerns. But I do think that the space is starting to change, and we're going to be able to start to see more companies that are popping up to help us with biomanufacturing. We've spoken to a few. A lot of them are in Europe, though, right now. So I'm hoping that in the US, we'll see more of this landscape pop up so that all of these companies that are working so hard on their R&D can make this whole product fruitful and introduce consumers to products that are ultimately more sustainable.
That's great. Thank you, Laura. And you mentioned a little bit about manufacturing there. I want to come back to that in a bit during the group discussion. But, it's interesting to point out that you and Will are of a pool of founding talent that is not typical of, I'd say, the what life sciences and the therapeutics market life sciences is typically known for, right? You're not physicians, you're not clinical researchers, right? Will, you graduate from ITP. For those of our audience who are not familiar, NYU's Interactive Telecommunications Program, or ITP, is world renowned for interactive digital technology. And Laura, as a food scientist, I'm curious, Laura, as a quick follow-up, what other types of founding talent should folks be considerate of when thinking of consumer technologies, consumer biotech solutions?
So that's a great question. And definitely, as we were raising our last round of funding, I got this a lot of, you're not going to be in there in the lab. We want to invest in a technical founder. And I think that there's a lot of other attributes that are really important of founders for me personally, and something that I think you can't really put onto somebody is the passion for the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're somebody who can be at least somewhat scientifically literate, which I like to think of myself as, I think that there's a lot of learning you can do and great people you can surround yourself by. In terms of traits, I would say that's a really important thing. And being able to know where your skill set is compared to what you need to be bringing on. And so one of the things I really like about being here at Biolabs is there's so many people surrounding us that if we can't necessarily answer a question, which, you know, I have a really talented team of scientists, there's a lot of people we can lean on, and being able to lean on the community here in New York is a really special thing that we can do, especially as a non-technical founder. So those are the things that have been helpful for me that I would think about for founders.
Thank you for entertaining that sort of last minute insertion of a question, Laura.
Absolutely.
Okay, so with the time that we have left, I want to save time for obviously Q&A, but also a couple of group discussion questions. First of which is how one decides on NYC. And some of you already covered it in your intros, so thank you for that. Maybe just if you would like to echo that, that's fine. But then maybe you can tell us, as you are all growing companies, what is top of mind as you plan the physical growth of your company in New York City? And so let me know if there are no volunteers. Any volunteers?
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm out. Go ahead.
Okay, Prem.
Yes.
I saw you raise your hands.
Yeah, we are in this absolute, need for space bursting at the seams, but I have to say my love for New York has always been here. It's been, 2 decades, a little bit longer, and so building this out in New York has been phenomenal. The pandemic has definitely changed my views. I think it would have changed a lot of people, and the closeness, things being closed, the city's not offering what it really, is here for, the culture, the shows, all this, so it's really putting a damp to, what we do here. And so looking at, do we still want to continue to be here as a lot of companies start to escape? I think it's really going to be critical of how this community, how the government, how the leadership really responds to this in the next few months. If you can't get the city schools, back up and running, if you can't get people's lives back in shape, I think this city, unfortunately, is going to be doomed. Sorry for the, but to me, it's the reality of, why we're doing what we're doing. We're trying to have a testing protocol so that people can, get back up and running. We can put that bushfire out before it becomes a forest fire. We can create these, testing bubbles and really get action back. But without true leadership in the city to really initiate a lot of this mass testing across, I'm afraid of what's to come in the next few months, the next year, because the longer that schools stay closed, the more people leave, and it's going to be really hard to get them back. And that is my biggest fear right now. I'm looking for, as we expand, do I stay here? Because we've been pulled, I don't know if you know, we have a partnership with the Wynn Resorts. We are building a lab in the casino. Yes, it's true. And Boston, and, it's on and on and on. And it becomes a point of, the things you can do outside the city, right? I can't even believe how fast we put this lab up in the Wynn Resorts. And I'm starting to see how many things we can do outside the city. And I'm hoping that the city can, rise to the occasion once again. It's always been a fantastic place to, 2 decades here, but how we respond over the next couple of months and what we do with our school system and things of that nature, I think are really going to play a role in what's to come in this space and whether people continue to look for it or they start to look elsewhere.
No, that's good.
So,
Anthony?
Yeah. So I'll give you kind of the exact opposite sentiment, but I think that, as founders, right, and doing startups, literally the struggles that the city is going to have in getting back up and running and dealing with this COVID is the same as that kind of parallels of what we have in running a business base, right? It's like no 2 days are the same. Every day is something different. And it's really about just trying to find ways to get over those roadblocks. And for me, honestly, we move our company here to New York City for 2 reasons. One is it is exactly that ethos of just getting things done based, right, and finding ways to make things work, that I want to make sure that's my mentality. And I want to make sure that kind of fits what we're doing with the company. The other thing is, the sheer opportunity in terms of growth, right? So we looked at San Francisco, we looked at Boston. When you're looking at early stage kind of incubator space, we have a lot here, right, with J Labs and Biolabs and the Alexandria Center base, right? And they're great places with great companies around that are very diverse. And so that was a a point of advantage for us. The other one was obviously we got up in startup New York. And so the tax benefits of that definitely help us in terms of recruiting people. And so we have scientists we brought up from Virginia, for instance, obviously a very cheap place to live, but moved here to join our company. We have our head of R&D coming from Boston that's going to move here. And so that was an important part in terms of recruitment. And then you look at just the resource here. So what you can't replicate, and it works probably for Prem and diagnostics, but in a therapeutic aspect, in terms of clinical trials and access to talent, I mean, we have a bioinformatician from Columbia. We just hired a scientist we're hiring a scientist from Rockefeller, interviewing another one from Sinai. And so I think that the talent pool here is something you can't replicate, right? And the schools aren't going to move. And so I think that the long term, we're bullish. And then we looked at where can you scale, and everyone's talking about scale here. And you heard kind of from this conference alone, there's probably nothing short of 9 or 10 different major developments taking place where we can move as we look to set up manufacturing and longer term operations. So to me, I think New York City had all the attributes of where you want to be if you're right now, you're an early stage biotech looking for a way to grow and to get some differentiation from those other major metropolitan areas.
You're on mute, Carlo.
Thank you very much, Brad. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna change it up a little bit and pivot to something that you mentioned, Anthony, and emphasize is talent, right? And Will and Chirag, you guys just underwent sort of a big talent recruitment push. Could you speak a little bit about that, of what it was like to have to sort of accelerate and staff up as quickly as you did, and what was that scale?
Yeah, I'll let Chirag talk to the details of going from 0 to 200 lab technicians in 2 months. But just to give a little bit more context on Opentrons and talent, our talent pool only exists in Brooklyn. Our entire hardware engineering team used to work at MakerBot, which is the first consumer 3D printer company. And so they had built an affordable 3-axis robot before. It just made little plastic things instead of pipetting things, right? And so we were able to basically whole bore move them a few blocks and create this robot with this talent pool that was readily available because of the Brooklyn technology ecosystem. So I think that every type of talent is in New York, but there are also some types of talent that you only find in New York. And I just wanted to make that point. And Chirag, would love to hear you detail the huge ramp that we've gone through at PRL.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key factors in the success of scaling this lab up so quickly is actually the location. New York City has probably the largest number of academic medical centers in the United States in a single small geographic area, and each one of those hospitals is generally highly regarded. And so their training programs, their diagnostic laboratories, their clinical services, all are places where they have skilled individuals that, for us as a new lab, it is a great place to go and recruit, and an easy place to go and recruit, because we don't necessarily have to ask people to relocate. We can just ask them to come to a different location within the city to help us, build our own lab up quickly. So I thought the location itself is great. Obviously, the academic medical centers are great, and then kind of the mission that we have in terms of providing the diagnostic service across the city, specifically for the HHC and potentially expanding to other hospital systems depending on the need. I think that shared vision really was able to attract a number of people in very quickly and help us, successfully start testing.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Chirag. And I'm sure a lot of folks from our audience will be wondering and following up with you in terms of what is the complete story behind PRL. So, Laura, I want to start with you in terms of the next group discussion, which is a focus on a wish list of the types of space for frontier technology companies. A panelist from the prior panel mentioned manufacturing as sort of a wish list, and maybe certainly with respect to consumer biotech, there is a path to market that's a lot sooner and more accelerated than a traditional sort of 10-year timeline for developing a therapeutic, right? So I was wondering, could you speak to what your wish list is for more near-term space, but also as you grow your company in New York City, if there is sort of a tie-in to manufacturing?
Yeah, definitely. So this is great timing because right after this, I'm going to tour a couple spaces that we're hopefully going to grow into. So we've got a big wish list at my company. And I think for us, it's really, in lab, there's a couple things that we're looking for. One of them is being able to merge a more traditional food science lab with a molecular biology lab and have the tools for both kinds of things in one place. That doesn't really exist right now. And one of the reasons why we're going to have to, of course, we're eventually going to move out of biolabs because we're quickly going to outgrow it, and we already are, but we can't make stuff in this lab and eat it. And ultimately, we're making something that we're going to be eating. So, that's a big consideration for us and something where we're looking for a little bit more of a customized space. I'd say the other thing for us that I'm sure is something that's really top of mind for a lot of people in the consumer biology space is GMP pilot plants. We've tapped into probably all that exists in this country and beyond. I'm actually Canadian, so we've looked into Canada as well, and having that GMP certification in a pilot plant or, in something small enough at scale that we can kind of send our tech to for proof of concept in a larger format has to be GMP for FDA. If we want to send anything to the FDA, we need to make sure that these facilities are GMP, and there really isn't very much in the New York area. I believe AMRI offers a GMP service, and there's a couple academic institutions, but having something closer to the city would be so helpful for us. And right now we're sending product we're sending our strains over to Berkeley, to a lab over there who has GMP facility, and we wish that we didn't have to do that. So I'd say those are the wish list items for us.
Great, thank you. Anthony, as an incubator company that probably has expansion on the mind, what's your wish list?
Yeah, it's pretty much a lot of the same stuff, right? So for us, I mean, our typical lab space requirements are molecular biology lab space and then some chemistry space. But it's interesting to see now too. I mean, I think that this is so for us, we need to manufacture large amounts of DNA and then be able to take that and do a lot of different genetic constructs with that. So the manufacturing capacity we're looking for is in that area of kind of merging synthetic bio with a lot of kind of what we're doing in traditional cloning. And the question for us really is the question of, are we going to do manufacturing in-house or outsource it? Because that's gonna be a major cost. And I mean, and I was listening kind of Laura talking for us. I mean, for a $25 million round, a full quarter of that is going to be used for manufacturing, right? So it's amazing now how much dynamics is changing from just a traditional R&D, right? And actually understanding kind of underlying biology and things like that to actually the scale is a major component of biotech nowadays. And so from that standpoint, I think when we look at our space requirements, it really is 80% of that is traditional kind of molecular biology and chemistry and then regular office space, but the rest of it is going to be all built out for manufacturing. And the question is going to be how much of that we do either in the same location or do we actually outsource manufacturing somewhere else because it's more cost effective. And it doesn't have to be housed directly where we're actually creating all of the zip codes and all the different ligations for the product concepts.
That's helpful. So I've heard sort of the narrative that manufacturing is better suited for other jurisdictions, but I've also heard a pretty strong case for there being a home for manufacturing, biomanufacturing in Brooklyn and that level of scale up. So with that, Will and Prem, as entrepreneurs that are committed to the borough of Brooklyn, there are certainly a lot of real estate assets, industrial real estate assets, including Biobat and Bat at large, Industry City, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and of course the SUNY Downstate Biotech Incubator. What's left in the landscape of Brooklyn in terms of the facilities that you guys need to scale your companies?
I would say the facilities are there now. That's great. What really strikes me again is you map it out and you're like, oh, this is 2 miles, but it takes me 45 minutes to an hour to go 2 miles.
Mhm.
I think like this to me is just the most perplexing thing. You've got, my commute from going down Nostrand Avenue, and you get one lane, a bus lane that is mapped out for the whole day and empty. And you got this these people park, the inability to move quickly in a borough is actually the most inhibitory part of commercial activity, quite frankly. And I think it's a simple solution of cleaning up the streets of where you can park, where you cannot, how the flow of traffic can move, like down a street to facilitate commerce. Because if I could move from Downstate Incubator to Biobat in the time that it should take to go 2 or 3 miles, maybe double that a little, because it's New York City, I get it. But these things, aside from the space, but the convenience of getting there, of the access to it, these types of things of, making synchronized lights like we have in Manhattan. I'm praying for the day of synchronized lights in Brooklyn to help the flow. What was that song they used to say going east to west was horrible, but you can go uptown, downtown, right? These are the things that I think, the space is now there, right? You have the Biobat, you have space, but it's the logistical nightmare of, wait, if I have 2 spaces and I've got 2 teams and we got to go back and forth, or we have this or that, or how does my team get here? That is the ultimate headache. I've got to think about, okay, access to subways, but no one wants to ride the subways anymore. So now is there parking, because people are commuting and they refuse to ride the subway now in this current moment in time. So, these are the things where it's got to be a concerted effort between, Department of Transportation, to make our lives, there could definitely be a lot more done there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Will, very briefly, because I'd really love to take at least 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Your thoughts on what's left in Brooklyn.
What Prem was saying resonates a lot. We've looked at the Navy Yard space, but it would add another 20 minutes to everybody's commute to go there. Mm-hmm. And so that's just, it's like, when we were 15 people, it's kind of okay because you can sit at lunch and be like, you guys want to move to the Navy Yard? Okay, let's go. But now that we're 150 people, you can't just tell everybody that their commute just got longer. So I think it's really good point that there are a lot of great discrete real estate resources in Brooklyn, most of them underutilized, probably because it's so hard to get to them. I think that's really a good point.
Good. All right. So for our Brooklyn influencers and stakeholders on the call, take that home with you. And with that, I'm going to entertain one of the questions that's coming up on the chat, which is, to what extent are you able to work from home in a laboratory? And personally, I think back to my grad school days when, you would often go back to the lab at sometimes odd hours of the night to just check on an experiment. To what extent is that actually happening now? Anthony, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so you can't work from home, but definitely the lab lends itself to off commute hours basically, right? So we definitely have people coming in. Typically our day here starts around 10 o'clock and then they'll leave at 6 or 7, as opposed to normally they would come in like 7 or 8. And so that reduces a little bit of the commute and obviously exposure to other people. For our people that are doing computational biology, right, they're all work from home, remote anyhow. So that actually works out very well. But yeah, I don't see, unfortunately, a situation whereby as things start becoming more close to normal, where people are commuting, coming back and forth into the office. And even here right now in biolabs, we're seeing more and more people come in, right? Both new companies and like we're hiring. I'm sure Laura's nodding her head, she's hiring as well. And so you definitely see, and we opened our lab back up in the middle of July, and it was, I would say it seemed like maybe 25% capacity here. And now within that short period of time, you're seeing a lot more people back here, and the lab is being fully utilized. And so to that extent, I don't think the lab lends itself well to working from home, but it does lend itself to having flexible shifts and flexible schedules.
That's great. Laura, do you have anything to add there?
I was going to say similar. I mean, for us, we're right now hiring people, and we can't do this work at home. And you know, for us, the other part of what we're considering is we're on our own timeline, but we're also on our investors' timeline. So anytime we say or we cut down lab work, it affects our timeline and our go-to-market, which is really tough for us, especially as a young company, as a newly funded company, and I would say a company that's going into the consumer space where a lot of the competitors can, you know, get stuff done competitively at a timeline compared to us. So it's just really impossible for us to work from home at this point. And we're seeing it's the same thing for everybody here at Biolabs. It's full here every single day. Like you can't even get a conference room.
Yeah.
So it's pretty busy.
But you know, Carlos, so an interesting point I'll interject, and taking kind of what Will and Prim were saying about this maker community, right? So we are demoing a new flow cytometer, and interestingly enough, they actually have it set up now in the home of the tech support group. So it may be possible in the future actually to set up a incubator, a flow cytometer, and do it all from home, but we're not there yet.
Oh my gosh, garage band biotech.
Exactly.
Every single one of our Opentrons engineers has a robot at home right now because they have to troubleshoot with the hardware. There's nothing else you can do, you know?
Yeah.
Well, we did some COVID diagnostics in the kitchen in a sous vide, you know, because we're making out the 30-minute at-home test, right? So we wanted to make sure it worked at the kitchen, and certainly it does. With the oven on warm or the sous vide. Sous vide was fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
be able to spit in a tube and throw it in a, you know, sous vide.
Yeah.
Folks don't realize that those are actually tools of the trade in the lab. And
Yeah.
right. But in a food science context, they also have applications in the kitchen.
Yep.
Nancy, I'm not sure if I'm seeing the complete list of questions here. That's the only one I see on my end. Are there any questions that you're seeing on your end?
No, just a comment from Loretta, who is with the Empire State Development, and she's saying there are manufacturing opportunities on Long Island and throughout New York State. Obviously, don't know, you know, for startups that need proximity to where their manufacturing facilities are, if that would work. But I'm not seeing any other questions. So if there is anyone that has a question, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I mean,
Mitch,
I just, oh, is there a question? Or I'd love to just say a little more about the manufacturing sort of arc of a startup.
Yeah.
please.
Because I think that there is huge manufacturing and then there's small manufacturing. And so we make a robot, right? And all of our supply, we make it in Shenzhen, China. And Shenzhen has been able to create our first robot for the same price as our 10,000th robot, and everything in between. And the key is not just, you know, is there a facility that can, you know, run a manufacturing line through it? You need to have a whole ecosystem of smaller facilities that you can go and prototype in, and the talent of people who can scale up your operation from small to large. And so as we're thinking about, you know, manufacturing in New York, and in particular biomanufacturing, because I think that New York has a very unique advantage in terms of talent pool, and sort of extra services in terms of consumer biotech, right? But we are missing the scale up capacity. And so that's not just the let me make 100 million tons, that's also the let me make 10 liters iteratively over and over again, and learn from that very quickly and efficiently. And so I think, you know, we have to think very holistically about this problem. And it starts with real estate, because if you don't have space, you can't do it. But the ecosystem has to grow beyond that.
That's a great thought. Thank you for sharing that, Will, because it's a very important, substantial nuance to manufacturing.
Carlo, I've been talking to you about this for 5 years.
That's true. That's true. And
I'm hearing it from other people.
you're preaching to the choir on my end. I mean, certainly what Laura was saying also earlier on GMP manufacturing facilities. That's something that we've been devoting a lot of attention to through the Life Sci NYC initiative, and hoping to be able to share more on that soon. But the idea there is that there are certain specialized facilities and certain classes of space and uses of space that we need to be considerate of. And certainly Prem, in our time as fellow board members of BioBat, that arc, that narrative of biomanufacturing, something that we've examined a couple of times with Eva and Kathleen and folks there. So we're not finished by any means, Nancy. That's for sure.
I know. We're all just getting started. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And Carl, I guess it's one last one before you jump off too, or we jump off. What about so I mean, what you do see in other cities like Boston, obviously, and San Francisco are kind of, they address some of these commute issues, right? Whether it be through shuttle bus or things on those lines. Any plans? I mean, I'm looking at where all these major buildings are going to be set up. They're all around the city. Any plans for commuting options?
Well, I think that's something that, is you're right to point out. Something that's something that we have a dialogue with developers that we work with and partner with as a consideration, because transportation, we understand that it's not a complete and sort of ready to go package, right? It often needs to catch up with how industries grow so fast, especially this one. So shuttle buses and shuttle transportation is certainly sort of an interim solution as the clusters get started. So to answer your question, yes, that we do have those discussions with developers, and we coordinate and have a dialogue with them. Any other questions? Mitch, I see that you've joined. Do you have any questions for our panelists in the last minute or so?
I did, and you answered it, so.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. All right, with that, thank you again for all of you joining. It was a big panel, so thank you for being efficient with your words. And thanks for, again, Mitch, Nancy, and all the planners for the opportunity for all of us to join.
And thank all of you for your time, and well done.
Yeah, just terrific discussion. And just, from 3 years ago when we started our first symposium to hear how far all of you have come in that time, I think is really encouraging, and just really looking forward to further growth in the years ahead. And stay with us, keep coming, and we're wanting to see you grow.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.